Hello, this week we're here to talk to you about the Bloody Code, arguably one of the most draconian legal systems that the British Isles has ever seen. The Bloody Code is the catch-all term given to the legal system of Great Britain and Ireland in the 18th and the early 19th century. And this is a period of history when the death penalty was most liberally applied throughout our courts. At its peak in 1810, there were over 200 hanging offences on the British statute books. And we're not just talking for the bigger crimes like rape and murder and treason, but also crimes that we might consider to be relatively petty and harmless today. So to start off, I'm going to suggest a few hanging offences for you now, and just see if you can guess which one of these we have made up. So we have damaging a fish pond, impersonating a Chelsea pensioner, being in a public park with a blackened face, harming a horse, and pickpocketing to the value of more than 5 shillings. Well, if you said harming a horse, well done, you're right. Stealing a horse, that'll get you hanged. But harming one, that seems perfectly okay. Huh? Well, this sounds harsh and barbaric, and yeah, it probably is, but there is also a logic to it as well. You've got to remember that this comes from a time before a police force. In fact, the very idea of a standing force of people to police the populace struck at the very heart of personal liberty, and it was opposed on both sides of the House of Commons. Both liberty and property had to be protected, come what may. It also comes from a time before the organised prison system that we know today. I mean, we had prisons such as roundhouses and debtors' jails, but they're there just to hold people while the appropriate warrant is executed, whether that be for repayment of debt, whether that be for transportation, or whether that be for permanent execution. They're not there for long-term offenders. And against this backdrop, there needs to be a clear and easily understood deterrent to criminal activity. And there is. A noose. Now, hanging is a slow affair. Before William Marwood introduced the long drop method to our justice system, the condemned criminal could expect to be slowly strangled to death, taking as long as 15 minutes to die. And following this, the body would be cut down and placed in a gibbet cage at the city limits as food for the crows, or passed to anatomists for dissection. With that in mind, you might want to think twice about stealing a shilling. Lord Halifax said of the Bloody Code at the time, "It's important to understand we do not hang a man for stealing a horse. We hang a man so that horses are not stolen." Now, other offences that could see you dancing the Tyburn jig, as it was known, include keeping the company of gypsies for more than a month, or damaging Westminster or London Bridge. Now again, damaging a bridge might sound extremely draconian, but it isn't as extreme as it sounds when you consider the crime in question. This here is Roke's map of London, drawn up in 1746, and if you just look to the river, you can see that across the river connecting London to Southwark, there are only 2 bridges. Damaging either of these bridges would have an absolutely catastrophic effect on London's economy and trade. So, those bridges need to be protected, even at the risk of the life of the criminal in question. Now, one of the great ironies about the Bloody Code, though, is it doesn't even come close to addressing the problem that it was put in place to solve. Across the period, crimes didn't reduce, and if anything, the type of crime and the seriousness of crime actually got worse. Now, if we just think about this for a moment, if you're going to get hanged for stealing 5 guineas, and you're also going to get hanged for causing death, well, then you may as well shoot your victim for his money rather than just steal it the old-fashioned way. So under the Bloody Code, the public are certainly not any safer than they were before. And if that wasn't counterproductive enough, the actual death sentences across the period show a marked decrease, with more people being hanged before the Bloody Code comes into force than during it. And one of the reasons behind that is that juries are actually quite reluctant to convict theft cases at that level knowing that a mandatory death sentence awaits. Instead, they would commit what's known as pious perjury. And what pious perjury is where they deliberately reduce the value of goods to a level that falls below the mandatory death sentence. And we've evidence of this in the case of Mary Behan, 1751, as told in the Old Bailey's records. It reads, Mary Behan, of the parish of St Andrew, Holborn, was indicted for feloniously stealing 1 calico gown, value 40 shillings, 1 calico waistcoat, value 10 shillings, and some shirts and other linen, the property of Joseph Coulson. She was convicted, but the jury found her guilty of theft to the value of 4 shillings and 10 pence, which meant she was branded rather than hanged. As the Georgian period closed, more humane punishments came into vogue. Why kill these people when they can be used to build the colonies in Australia and Tasmania? And transportation became the go-to punishment for all but 6 major capital offences, and those capital offences would stay on the statute books until as late as 1998. Today we live in more civilised times, but the debate about public safety versus individual liberty will rage on and rage on for all eternity. But just remember, 200 years ago, the reason we killed almost every criminal was to protect the personal liberty from the state. Go figure. Bye bye.